Hey guys, welcome to the Stand Up Review podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're reviewing Jimmy Carr's 2016 special Funny Business. Let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by our patrons. If you want to help support the podcast, then head on over to patreon.com/standupreview. With tiers starting at as little as £1, there are some great benefits, such as voting for which specials you want reviewed, Q&As, bloopers, early access to podcasts, exclusive podcasts, and many more. Sign up at patreon.com/standupreview, and thank you for your support. Okay, so a little bit of background before we jump into the show itself. Jimmy Carr is a hugely popular and well-known British comedian. He's a major part of the comedy scene and a regular host on many TV shows over here in the UK. He's been touring pretty much non-stop since 2003. This is just one of his many shows. I've seen pretty much all of his shows, but this one stands out a little bit for me personally, as I actually went to see him live during this tour. I haven't seen the recorded version of it though. I, for whatever reason, didn't watch it back when it did come out. And it was a long time ago that he did this tour, so I didn't really remember any of the jokes. In terms of his comedic style, Jimmy is known for his one-liners, quick one-liners, and dark humour particularly. Jimmy doesn't waste any time at the start of the show. He jumps straight into some jokes. He's extremely confident taken to the stage, and the crowd know what they're in for. He starts off with some jokes about women. They're quick-fire jokes, very much standard style for him. Dark humour that he's known for straight from the off. And again, the audience are well aware that this is what they've signed up for. Something Jimmy does quite well, particularly in this bit, is that he'll set up jokes so that there's a very obvious sexist punchline before taking them in a completely different direction. This is sometimes done using self-deprecating humour, which is another staple of his character and seen throughout all of his shows. Another thing he does in this opening bit is something that I personally love in comedy, and something that I do myself very much to the annoyance of everyone who knows me. He'll tell a very obvious joke before explaining it in great detail to a particular member of the audience. I know that's not for everyone, but I absolutely love that. He then gets the audience involved a little bit more, something that will pop up a lot throughout the show. There's an accountant in the audience, and he makes a great reference to his tax avoidance scandal from 2012. If you don't know about that, then I'm not going to go into much detail about it. But all of this is very smooth. In terms of comedians' audiences, Jimmy Carr's are probably the best in terms of getting involved with the show. After that short section, he goes on to talk about political correctness. This is the kind of thing that's expected from him, but he's very good at just about staying on the right side of the line when it comes to talking about sensitive issues. And he's built his career off that, something that a lot of people would have been shut down early on because they couldn't get it right. It's a very difficult thing to do, but Jimmy has really built a strong career out of doing it. He then talks to various types of nurses within the audience, and one really impressive thing about his audience participation is that his responses are extremely quick, and given that he has little control over what's said, I mean, I suppose in this bit at least he knows he's talking about various types of nurses, but even just throughout the show, he basically has no control over what the audience are going to give him, and he's always extremely quick with whatever jokes he comes out with. He goes on to tell some jokes about sexuality. It's kind of a weird bit. It's very inoffensive. He stays away from making any actual comment on sexuality, but that's kind of the broad topic of the jokes. The next bit involves him reading some text messages that the audience were prompted to send him before the show. Now, this is one part I've got quite a big problem with. Live at the Apollo, which was a comedy show in the UK, they used to have a segment where they did this, and that was fine because it was part of the format of the show, and it wasn't a comedian's act. They didn't do this as sort of their bit. But to do it in a stand-up special like this, it kind of just feels lazy to me. I mean, one, the format is exactly the same as in Live at the Apollo, and two, it's just getting an audience to write 5 to 10 minutes of your show for you. He does a good job in terms of interacting with them, but it's still essentially just him reading text messages. I don't know. I mean, I would expect better from someone of Jimmy's ability. I thought it was a little bit weak, but maybe that's just me. He then drops back into his standard routine of quickfire jokes with a little bit of audience participation mixed in. During this bit, though, he talks about misogyny and sexism. It gets kind of strangely serious. There's a change of pace, the tone drops a little bit. He ends it with a couple of jokes, but the way he changes the tone, the payoff isn't really there in terms of the laughs, and it's a difficult thing to make a serious point in the middle of a show. You've got to kind of be able to make that serious message, but then lift the mood again at the end with some jokes. And as I said, it's very difficult. I don't think he quite pulls it off here. But the way he then transitions out of that is quite clever. An extra point sort of I want to slip in here is that between the text messages and the section we're about to discuss, he tells some stories, which is, it's a little bit different to his usual style, but they're very good. He keeps them short so they don't stand out too much. And the joke aspect of the stories is very similar to his other stuff. But he does a very good job here of slipping in some stories, like I said, a little bit different to his usual style, but it's quite nice to see. In the next part of the show, he invites the audience to heckle him. And this is a feature in most of his specials. And it's different to the text messages bit, because the emphasis here is very much on his responses rather than the heckles themselves. And it's a very important distinction to make. He's very good at fast comebacks and putting down heckles. It's one of the things he's known for. It's a fantastic portion of the show. But again, it's more about him having the responses rather than the audience creating the jokes themselves. After this is then probably the second worst part of the show for me. He goes on to describe and have the audience suggest some unusual or funny sex acts. And it kind of just feels like him reading Urban Dictionary or something like that. There wasn't really any jokes there. It was kind of just, here's a thing you could potentially do during sex. Weird, right? Again, it feels a little bit lazy. It's kind of like some filler bit where he didn't have enough jokes to fill the show or something. I expect better of someone of Jimmy's talent, really. It's just, again, lazy, not what you want to see in a Netflix special like this. The show ends the same way many of Jimmy's show ends, with him telling gradually darker and darker jokes until the end of the show. And this is usually my favourite part of his shows. In this special, there's a little bit too much of him explaining that that's what he's doing. It's his first Netflix show. I don't know if he's kind of trying to get that message across to audiences who perhaps don't know him. He explains why he's telling the dark jokes. So again, maybe he's just trying to get that across for a different audience. And then the joke that he ends on is very tame, especially in comparison with some of the other jokes in this bit. It's one of the sort of more tame jokes in there. There's potentially a reason for this, in that this was filmed fairly soon after the Charlie Hebdo shooting, and the closing joke is in relation to that. So perhaps it was a little bit more controversial at the time. It certainly hasn't aged well. But again, this, considering it's one of my favourite parts, perhaps I'm being a little bit too critical on it, but he's just very explaining it, and it feels like he's doing it for a new audience, which again he is, so perhaps he can be excused for that a little bit. But there's something about, you got to keep to your core audience as well, so a little bit of a weak ending for me. A couple of extra things to note regarding the show. In terms of callbacks, he doesn't use them very often, but when he does, they're very well used. He'll remember what different members of the audience have said and relate things back to them where he can. Transition-wise, the nature of one-liners pretty much means there's no need for transitions, but he does group jokes together very well. The structure of the show is very well set out. Nothing comes across as awkward or out of place. He tends not to stay on one topic for too long, and if he does have a lot of jokes in one area, he'll split them up throughout the show in a way that feels very natural. The structuring of the whole show, I feel like, is very well done, and this is something that he's crafted over time almost to perfection. His stage persona, it's a little bit difficult to talk about because it's so well established at that point. He's very confident, a little bit cocky, he's got that self-deprecating aspect to it. I would be quite interested to see what people in America, or perhaps people who aren't used to his persona, whether they're able to grasp it straight away or if they quite understand it as much, because he's so well known in the UK that he doesn't really have to try and get that character across anymore. People know his stage persona at this point, to the point that for me to point out whether he gets that across is very difficult because I already know what he's doing, so I can't really say that. But I think he does still get it across quite well, and it's very clear that he's confident in his persona. As for the audience, over the course of his career, Jimmy has built an audience that really fits his comedy shows. They know they're going to be involved a lot, they know the type of humour they're in for, and his crowds are always ready for the audience participation sections. I think they improve the show quite a lot in their involvement and the way he gets them involved. One thing that would be quite interesting to do will be to look at some of his older shows to see how that audience has moulded over the time, because he has now managed to cultivate an audience that he can really use to enhance his shows, and he does it in a way I don't think I've seen many comedians do. Now for some final thoughts on the show. Jimmy's shows are always a great watch. He creates a very relaxed atmosphere from the offset, and despite his brand of comedy, he's very good at avoiding any kind of tension within the shows. My only real negative would be that this show feels a little bit lackluster compared to some of his earlier work, and I actually don't think that's Jimmy's fault. One-liner comedians have a lot of jokes stolen now on social media, and watching back some of these jokes that have since been shared and retweeted thousands of times, it really does take the edge off them somewhat. I think social media might be playing a role in ruining one-line comedy, or at least the ability to rewatch it. You know, of course, only the best jokes from the best comedians are ever shared to that level, and Jimmy Carr is very much at the top. You know, seeing them performed by someone as good as Jimmy is far better than just reading it on Twitter. But you know, it does kind of take the edge off, and I kind of wish I could have rewatched this show having not read some of the jokes so many times. With all of that being said, if you're a fan of one-liners and you're a fan of dark humour, Jimmy Carr is always a fantastic watch. It's a very fun show, but watching it in 2020, I'm going to have to give it a 6 out of 10. Thanks for listening to the Stand Up Review podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to subscribe to get new episodes as soon as they come out every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Check out our Patreon for some awesome benefits at patreon.com/standupreview. If you have any thoughts or suggestions for the show, whether it be a new segment or a show you'd like us to review, let us know on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at standupreview, and give us a follow while you're over there. Feel free to share this or any of our other podcasts on any social media platform. Have a great day, and we'll see you for the next episode.